And now I come back, and that's my last topic, on that question that is emerging all the time, and it's extra coming after we have seen crises or failures. What is your relevance? So that's what I call the stimulating question. And if you go through the documents that ask these questions, the most recent example is a so-called green paper in Europe, but there are similar documents in other parts of the world. They basically say we have a high trust in the auditing profession. We do see how important that profession is and how much it can do, let's say, to the well-being of society as a whole. And this is typically the question that you are receiving as well. Help us, in particular, with the particular sector, in the public sector, tax audits, etc. And so that's why we are asking that question as well, because you can provide answers. And part of that answer is to clarify answers, but there's more to do. And that's, I will not deal with all of this in detail. We are also working on other projects. We have published an exposure draft on pro forma financial information, which is very important in prospectuses for listings, or when there is an acquisition of a company, then typically you have existing historical information and you combine it with the company to be acquired. You make certain assumptions what will change, and then you have revised figures. Well, what about a role of an accountant or an auditor there? Well, that's what this standard is about. So that's particularly helpful in environments where there are listings and acquisitions. But another topic, of course, is sustainability and environment. And that has much to do with the future of our children, our grandchildren. So that's also an area where we have engaged in, and we hope to finalize an exposure draft on greenhouse gas statements in December. So if companies report on their emissions and reductions, then there's also a need for assurance. And this is still very much of an open territory. There's not much defined in terms of reporting requirements. A lot of variation around the world that makes it a quite complicated project. And of course we are not much skilled in that. Auditing standards we have discussed over 100 years, but this is very new. Nevertheless, we are working hard on that as well. And just last week we published an exposure draft of practice statements. Practice statements is not a standard, it's not new requirements, it's really intended to help in a specific area, and this specific area is auditing complex financial instruments, which is of course applicable to banks and insurance companies, but nevertheless also to treasurers of larger companies. And you will be surprised how many even medium-sized companies engage to some extent in using complex financial instruments. So this is a difficult area, it had much to do with the crisis. And among others, the Financial Stability Board stimulated us much to come up with something that will be of help. Well, it's now there. It has the status of an exposure draft, so it may change in the future. Nevertheless, we encourage the profession worldwide to read it, to use it, to comment upon it, and to see how we can even improve it. We're working on other standards. Leave that for a moment. One more word, as I promised, on auditor reporting. I mentioned this message that we are receiving, and it is being discussed everywhere. Can and should the auditor report more in the external auditor's report? I have talked about the internal reporting to audit committees, boards, owners, etc. But this is about external reporting. And in particular, the question that is asked about the so-called soft stuff, all the elements in financial statements that are not black and white, assumptions, assessments, valuation of goodwill, loan loss allowances, fair values. And the question is, well, shouldn't the auditor share more with the outside world how he assessed, how his or her client has assessed these valuations and assessments, and why they have picked certain numbers if there will be a choice? Now this is a fascinating discussion. Of course it results in the question, is that a role for the auditors or is it primarily a role for companies and their boards by providing more disclosures? And some countries have found kind of an intermediate way. France is an example. On one hand, companies are required to be more explicit about these points. On the other hand, auditors have to report explicitly about how they assessed what management has done. And because management knows that the auditors are going to comment about that reinforces the quality of their explanations. This is a project under analysis. I'm not saying that soon we will come up with a revised standard, because we wanted to do research, we wanted to do outreach with many involved parties, and this is one project where the American PCAOB, the audit regulator for the audits of listed companies, is very interested in, and so we have a dialogue with them as well. But the message for now is that you should be aware that we are having these forward-looking projects as well. And I talked about disclosures. Let me also mention the liaison with the International Accounting Standards Board. We are not discussing accounting standards as such. That's not our role and not our expertise. But we have an ongoing dialogue with the ISB, and I've listed a number of specific projects at the bottom, where we point to concerns from an auditability perspective. That we say, well, if you would draft it like this, then that poses so and so complications to auditors. Would there be other solutions or alternatives, saying it differently? And we think that this is a helpful exercise, and so does the IASB. So all in all, if I also apply the word sustainability on auditing and assurance, I've shared with you a number of our important projects. I've shared with you the importance of the continued dialogue and outreach with many around the world. And I also wanted to say that we are publishing a consultation paper on our future strategy, the period 2012-2014, probably in January. And we will ask the world, including you, questions about what should we have on our future agenda. We will explain what we are doing and how that will move on into 2012, etc. But we are also asking the question, what are the priorities in addition that we should take on board? And we are very interested in receiving the comments. But we already had an online survey on the direction that it should take. And a key message from that survey is that we should spend more than half of our time on the adoption and implementation of the clarified ISAs. So basically the message from many around the world is, well, you have done a good job with these clarified ISAs, but make sure that they are adopted, implemented, understood in practice, and whatever you can do to help there, please do. And that goes as well for the quality controls. And emerging issues that are mentioned, for example, corporate governance. Should there be also assurance about the quality of corporate governance or internal controls? Well, we are asking that question. We have signaled the message. We are asking the question, tell us what our priorities should be. So let me end with this quote that was in a paper from IFAC, December 2007, saying that the sustainability of the accountancy profession depends, first of all, upon the quality of the services provided by its members. Well, that speaks for itself. But second, and that was, I think, a key line in my presentation, on the profession's capacity to respond both effectively and efficiently to the demands of the economy and society. And let me once again say how much I have learned and how much Jim and I are impressed by all the efforts that you, as a profession here, are paying to these very important questions. And we wish you very well of that, and wherever we can be of support, we will. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. The floor is now open for questions. The question answer session will be moderated by Vice President South, Mr. Zaid Bhatti, who is a fellow member of ICAP and an associate member of ICAEW. He has served the Institute for many years. He was a member of the Southern Regional Committee for 2 consecutive terms and its chairman for the years 2003 and 2007. He currently represents ICAP as a technical advisor to a member of the board of IFAC, as well as to the Asian Oceanian Standard Setters Group. He is the chairman of the Professional Standards Technical Advisory Committee. During the session, our attendants will be standing, and as soon as you indicate by your hand, they will come to you bringing the mic. I would now like to request